So hello everybody who's waiting for the session to start. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes to make sure that everybody has made it in okay. So hi everybody, we'll be starting in just a minute. In the interim, if you'd like to go to menti.com, the instructions are on the holding slide you can see in front of you. So either on a phone or a tablet or a computer. So menti.com, and then just pop in the code 203582. It'll ask you the first question, which you can do now while we wait for any latecomers. Thanks.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this Medical Mediation Foundation webinar, and thank you very much to the Paediatric Network for inviting us. I'm Sarah Barclay, the founder of MMF. Our focus today is a bit different from our usual work, which is mediating and managing conflict in health and social care. And the world you as health and social care professionals being asked to navigate at the moment has another dimension, really, the challenge of managing uncertainty, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Really trying to balance the internal conflict of personal fears and risks with the need to fulfill professional responsibilities, trying to lead teams, manage other people's concerns, while also trying to manage your own. And trying to lead on a day when perhaps you're not feeling very much like being a leader can be challenging in itself. So we hope that the skills and strategies we're going to share with you in this webinar will give you some practical solutions for responding to uncertainty in these extraordinary times. And we hope we'll leave you feeling stronger and more confident, but also able to acknowledge that it's okay to be feeling neither of those things. I'm delighted to introduce our presenters, Oscar Mathew, my co-director and fellow mediator, and Dr. Oscar Lyons, who runs leadership development programs for doctors and allied health professionals across a wide range of NHS organisations. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for hosting us this morning. And as Sarah's just mentioned, we're in a time of unusual uncertainty and stress for most of us. And many of us are operating in new environments, some of us in new roles with new teams. And it's hugely important that we're able to be aware and intentional about how we're behaving differently at this time. So our objective in this session is to give you some tools to help you consciously choose how to lead and how to work with your teams effectively during this uncertainty. We'll do that by giving you our 5 top steps for leading and responding to change and uncertainty, which are acknowledge uncertainty, build psychological safety, trust and belonging, care for yourself and your team, demonstrate your core values, and eliminate low priority tasks. We'll be aiming to get through this nice and sharp on time to finish at 9:30. Everything in this presentation is based on the best available evidence. We've spent a lot of time researching and evaluating best practice, and then we spend a lot of time making it digestible. We'll bring up some of this research throughout the presentation. If you do have any particular questions about where something came from, do get in touch with us and we'll be happy to supply you with full references and source material. We'll use Mentimeter as on the holding slide throughout the presentation to get your input. If you have any questions or comments, please put those in the chat option, and we will ask you to put some comments in the chat option as we go along. In addition to that, we would like to put together with you during the presentation a one-page sheet with some ideas that you can take away from it. So if you haven't already, please get a piece of paper in front of you. And what we want you to do is to divide it into 4 quarters like this and label them A, B, C, and D. And we'll put a couple of key ideas in each of those sections for you along the way. Before we get started though, we should introduce ourselves briefly. So as Sarah's mentioned, I'm Oscar Lyons. I'm a doctor from New Zealand and I'm a researcher in evidence-based leadership development in healthcare based at Oxford University. Oscar Mathew.
Yeah, hiya, hello everybody. So as Sarah said, I'm Sarah's co-director at MMF. I'm a healthcare lawyer by background, but in a distant past now, and I spend my time working mostly with teams within healthcare, trying to help them work better together.
So we want to make sure that you have a voice in this presentation as well. So the way that we would like to do that, as mentioned, is to use Mentimeter. So we have put together a slide and a question which just asks you how you feel. And this is what you've said. So the reason we ask this, and those of you who haven't logged into this, please do go to the top for the instructions, menti.com, and using the code here. This will come up each time we use the Mentimeter. The reason we ask this question is because our first step is to acknowledge uncertainty. There are literally hundreds of definitions of leadership and teamwork. The one that I like to use is deliberately really simple and broad. Leadership means achieving results with and through others. In order for us to work effectively with others, in order for us to work together with our teams towards a goal, we need to have a common understanding of where we are at right now, what the situation is for us and for our team. So the first step to effective leadership and uncertainty is to have self-awareness and to be honest with ourselves and the team. particularly when we're in situations where we're in formal positions of leadership, we can feel that we need to have all the answers for our team. Research does actually show that teams look to their leaders in times of uncertainty for that sense of certainty and direction. That does mean that propagating positivity and confidence is important. It is also important to honor that trust your team places in you by maintaining openness about what is uncertain. There's no point in sugarcoating things. You will either appear to be dishonest or out of touch, and neither of those are what we want. Your team needs to be aware of where we all are at and to have openness. There is a very clear body of evidence that suggests that leaders who are more approachable and open are less likely to miss important insights from their team, and they are more able to create the conditions for their teams to thrive as individuals and as a collective. So our first step is to do a self-audit. Think about where your team is at the right moment and where you are at and what you would appreciate in their shoes. What we want you to do is, in your A section of your piece of paper, take 3 minutes here. Put 3 of these in your A section, 3 columns, and write down to yourself, what has changed at the moment? What has changed? Also, what is the same? How many things are still the same as they usually are? Take 3 minutes here, and when you are feeling like you've got a few items in your column, what I'd like you to do is put in the chat a comment to say, which is the biggest column for you? So filling in these and then putting a comment in the chat about which is biggest. We'll spend about 60 seconds more here. So keep populating those and think which is the biggest column. Put that comment in the chat, as Oscar Matthews said. As a note, if you don't click the to all panelists and attendees, it only comes to us. I'd love this to be able for everyone to see it. So try and click the button that says send it to all panelists and attendees. So most of the ones that have come through to the panelists and to the attendees here have said changed here, but there are a couple of comments that the same column is also quite large. It's very common to have this changed column as being the largest one. Part of the reason for that is because we have something called loss aversion bias. So if we move away from a situation of stability, we tend to pay more attention to the changes from that and the loss. There are, however, for many people, a surprising number of things when we think about it that are the same. So one of the points of doing this is to think what is the same and to have gratitude for the positive things that we still have that are the same. Help your team maybe by encouraging a conversation about this. What has changed? What is the same? What are their concerns? And what are their hopes in this as well? What is the same? So that's first step, self-audit and acknowledging the uncertainty. I think Oscar is muted, unfortunately. He will start to talk to us about trust and psychological safety in just a second.
My mute button always just disappears at the wrong time. Hello, everybody. So yes, the second stage is about building trust and psychological safety in a team. Building a culture of trust and psychological safety can be transformational in getting a team through a period of uncertainty. Now, if you lead a team, or this is not something that you can simply do single-handedly, but what you can do is lay the foundations for it by showing and demonstrating that you consider it important. Now, trust and psychological safety are linked, but are similar but different topics. So psychological safety was championed by Professor Amy Edmondson at Harvard, and it was her idea that it's a belief within a team that you're not going to be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas or questions or concerns or mistakes. And trust, kind of a more familiar topic to most of us, has a definition by Brené Brown here as a mutual sharing of challenges and vulnerabilities and hopes and concerns. She's written a really good book called The Power of Vulnerability, which is also a TED Talk, which I like very much. Have a Google. Another way of looking at this is to think of trust as, will you give others the benefit of the doubt when you take a risk? So if you're in a meeting and you're thinking that person is probably going to be upset if I disagree with him, do you trust that they're not going to do that? Whereas psychological safety is, will you give other people the benefit of the risk, the benefit of the doubt when you take a risk? So your team expects you to speak up. It's how we do things. Do others make you feel like you can? And the reason that this stuff is so important is that it's right at the foundation stone of what makes teams work well together. This pyramid you have in front of you is by an American academic called Patrick Lencioni, who has his 5 dysfunctions of a team pyramid. And he has trust, vulnerability, and psychological safety at the very core. And he says, unless you have those components within a team, you can't build anything really on top of that, because you can't have the difficult conversations you need to when things go wrong. You don't have a cohesiveness, and then you can't do the kind of nuts and bolts stuff of who does what and general team goals. And a quote that speaks to me certainly in this area is by Antonio Damasio, who says, we're not necessarily thinking machines, we are feeling machines that think. So our primary way of engaging with the world, with our patients and with our colleagues, isn't as a functional body, it's as a human being. So unless we honour that element, we're not going to really be able to build anything on top of it. Which I think raises the question about, how do we do it? Trust isn't something that you can simply put into a room or summon. But what you can do from a leadership point of view and a team member point of view is put other people in situations that encourage them to open up to each other, because it's that openness that breeds trust. So what does that mean in practical terms? Here are some ideas that you might want to think about. Listening to each other as a primary way of engaging, especially the quieter and the absent voices that are all too often missed at work. It's asking people what they need and not assuming that you know. I'm often interested at how often when I'm working with teams, I think I know the answer, and that's not the right answer for them. Making sure that when you criticize the idea or the concept, not the person who's coming up with it. Thinking about an objective analysis of when problems have gone wrong, and avoiding blame, because blame is not helpful. The research on blame is very clear that it's basically always unhelpful, so avoiding it really. The research also points to the importance of keeping promises to each other, both the big ones and and the small ones. And finally, showing your team that you are able to draw your own boundaries and look after yourself in times of uncertainty gives them the confidence to do the same. So we're going to give you another Mentimeter to have a look at. If you go along to the next question. There we go. It's interesting to know which of these feels the most important to you at the moment. So just give it a minute for everybody to be able to contribute to this section. Yeah, some interesting ones there. So the listening more to each other coming out most prominently. And the issue around blame, which is often associated with healthcare, is low in this, which is interesting to me as well. Okay, thank you very much. I'll hand it back over to the other Oscar.
So every time we do this, we get a slightly different answer. One of the questions people ask us is which is the most important. The idea is that there is not one most important bit here. These are different aspects that we can each individually work on. So the most important question is which is the most important for me to work on at the moment, rather than which of these is the most important. They are all important. So far we've run through doing a self-audit and acknowledging uncertainty, and we've run through trust and psychological safety, building trust and psychological safety. The third step, and one of the most important steps, is to care for yourself and your team. This will look familiar to some of you and unfamiliar to others of you. It's called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, but it's more helpfully known as the performance curve or the stress response curve. Stress is here on the bottom. This is rising stress. And on the y-axis, we have increasing performance. The basic concept is that as stress increases, our performance increases up to a point, and then at that point, we start to drop off a cliff. Athletes are really familiar with this because they know that they need to psych up at the start before they perform in order to be able to get to their peak performance. And in another part of my life, I'm a singer, and I know that if my stress levels rise too high when I'm singing, I tend to tense up and I can get shakes in my voice. This curve applies just as well, though, into our clinical work and into our lives. We need a little bit of stress and pressure to get us going. But if that's too much, then we tend to slide towards anxiety and towards burnout. We stop properly caring for ourselves and for those around us, and we start to make mistakes. So I would like to ask you, where are you at the moment on this curve? Where are you at? This is the next Mentimeter question here. Okay, so we have an average that's starting to come in that is just over the edge of our 5 cliff, with some 6s and 7s in there. Now, the point of this is we do need some stress to get going. So no, we're not saying that we want you to be at a 1 out of 10. We definitely also don't want you to be at that 10 out of 10. So we're going to run through a couple of strategies that won't bring you all the way from 10 to a 1, but might help in terms of moving from a 7 to a 6, or from a 6 to a 5. In 2008, the New Economic Foundation was commissioned to explore and synthesize evidence on well-being enhancing strategies, and this will look familiar to lots of you. Their focus was to ensure that recommendations had foundations in scientific evidence and that they provided practical and usable ways to improve well-being at individual and at team and organizational levels. As we go through each of these, I will briefly introduce them, but I want you on your C section of your piece of paper to start writing down each of the 5 ways and one small thing you can plan in today to try for each. So the first of them is connect. There's strong behavioral and physiological evidence that indicates that feeling close to and valued by other people is a fundamental human need and one that contributes to us functioning well in the world. Research showed in 2013 that acts to create feelings of connection between individuals causes release of oxytocin and serotonin, which activates our reward circuitry and results in both happy feelings and conditioning towards forming more connections. So the first way is to connect. Some possible ideas for this. Maybe it's talking to someone over the phone instead of sending an email, speaking to someone new, asking how someone's weekend was and really listening when they tell you. Maybe it's when you go home, looking at your partner and thinking, how are they really, and asking them and having that connection with you. So 30 seconds in front of you, write down what can you do today to connect. The second of the ways to well-being is move. Regular physical activity is associated with lower rates of depression and anxiety across all age groups. Exercise, we know, is essential for slowing age-related cognitive decline and for promoting well-being. From a physiological point of view, exercise can include increased endorphins, increased mitochondrial function, and can support attenuation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Psychologically, we can have a distraction from feelings of depression and anxiety, and can have some of those positive feelings associated with mastery and self-efficacy. This can provide us with a wonderful way of taking a break for a minute from our work and from our stress. But the key here is to plan. Maybe play a game, garden, dance, take the stairs instead of the lift, go for a walk at lunchtime, maybe walk or cycle into work, or get off a public transport stop, one earlier than usual so that you can walk a little bit along the way. But the most important thing is discover a physical activity you enjoy that gives you a break and suits you. So take 30 seconds to say, what can you do today to plan in a bit of movement? I should say, as we're going along here, please put these in the chat because we can share some of our positive ideas here, and it means that we can get some other ideas from each other and realize that there are a whole lot of other things to do. So last 10 seconds, write something in the chat. What are you going to do to move? I'll give you 10 seconds for that. Just as we go on to the next one, try and click in the chat button, click to all panelists and attendees, because at the moment we've had lots of lovely responses into the panelists, and it's wonderful for us to hear what you're doing, and I'd love for you to share that with everyone else as well. So the third of the strategies is to notice. Reminding yourself to notice can strengthen and broaden awareness, and has been associated in a range of systematic reviews with various positive psychological effects, including increased subjective well-being, improved mental health, reduced emotional reactivity, and improved behavioral regulation. Specifically, making a point of noting the present can provide you with space to make intentional choices about your actions based on values and logic, rather than just emotional hooks, which Oscar will talk about in a minute. In addition, there's a clear application in healthcare. Intentionally making the space to notice your environment helps shift your mind into a diffuse focus mode, which improves your situational awareness. And that has been repeatedly shown to reduce errors made in healthcare. It also improves your ability to improvise and to consider options, which is strongly associated with better decision making. So create some space for some deliberate noticing and for being in the present. That could be a classic mindfulness thing, something like feeling the sun or feeling the breeze on your face on the way to work. It might be something that works for you differently. Maybe it's really noticing colleagues at the handover and saying what emotions are on their face. Do you feel those too? Pausing for a second at the start of the day and asking yourself, how is my body feeling? Do I feel tension? What needs do I have? So take 30 seconds to write down on your piece of paper something you can do today to notice, and then put that in the chat so that we can share it. The fourth of the ways to well-being is learning. Continued learning throughout life enhances self-esteem and encourages social interaction and more active life. There's evidence that suggests the opportunity to engage in educational activities particularly helps with older people to lift them out of depression, but the practice of setting goals has been strongly associated with high levels of well-being in all age groups. Learning something new isn't about grades or qualifications, but about setting ourselves a little challenge and then attempting to master it, to get that sense of achievement. For me, this is about playing music or learning to bake something new. It will be something else for you, but the key thing is to have that sense of achievement. Make it something small and satisfying, and most importantly, fun. Learning new things will make you more confident and have that sense of satisfaction and mastery. So maybe something new, maybe rediscovering something that you've done in the past, but write down on your piece of paper in front of you something that you could do today to make a space for learning, and then write it in the chat. So the fifth of the ways to well-being, actually very briefly, in learning, one of the key things here is that this does not have to be learning something to do with work at all. The key thing is here that it is satisfying and it is fun. So make something that you can do outside of work as well here. So the fifth way is give. we're in a profession, in a range of professions, where a lot of us came in because we wanted to be able to give of ourselves to others. Participation in social and community life has attracted a lot of attention in the field of wellbeing research. People who report that greater interest in helping others are more likely to rate themselves as happy. Giving doesn't mean physical things. It doesn't mean money. It doesn't even need to mean a whole lot of effort or time. The key thing here is to find a small way to do something nice for a friend, for a stranger, for a colleague. It might just be writing someone a thank you note and sharing the positive feelings that comes from that. It might be to smile at someone and see them smile back. Look for a small opportunity to make someone else's life just a little bit happy. Seeing yourself and your happiness linked to that wider community can be incredibly rewarding and creates connections with the people around us. So, take 30 seconds and say, what small act of kindness, what small thing could I give today? And write it in the chat. As a final thought in this, we often worry about burnout and compassion fatigue. There is consistent evidence linking empathy with reduced burnout. So acts of kindness actually create a space for us to share an emotional space with someone else, and to share that warmth and positive feeling. There has been a range of research that shows that those small acts of sharing and empathy can actually be quite protective against burnout. So we've run through 4 of these, and underlying all of them really is connecting, the 5th way to well-being. So, care for yourself and your team. Next step, demonstrate your core values.
Thanks very much, Oscar. So yes, demonstrating your core values, what does that mean? Do you remember near the beginning of the session, Oscar was talking about this idea of the unassailable leader? If you're leading, the catch is that you may be feeling lots of the things that came up at the beginning around uncertainty or anxiety about the world that you're existing in. But the catch for you as a leader is that you're also carrying those for your team as well when they come to you with them. And the better you are at showing that it's no problem and that you can perform, the heavier that burden can feel. So demonstrating your core values is a way of trying to find a way of responding to that world that isn't primarily emotional or based upon fear, but a way that is based upon the values that you have. So if you go to the next Mentimeter, there's a question that asks you, what are your 3 core values? Let's see what people come up with.
This can be a really hard question, so it doesn't have to be the top 3. What are 3 values that are really important to you? As you're doing this, write them down on the piece of paper in front of you as well. This is your D section. What are 3 of my top values?
be great if people could do this. So I'll give everyone about another 60 seconds, I think, to try and put these in the Mentimeter. Some prominent choices already coming through around, obviously, honesty, respect and integrity, as well as kindness and compassion. Okay, so yes, try and fill that out while we're doing that. This is what you want to do with those values. So this is a framework based upon acceptance and commitment theory. So when you're faced with a particularly hard decision as a leader or particularly hard time at work, this is a process that you can go through to try and respond in the best way that you can. So the first thing to do is to do that uncertainty audit that Oscar ran through at the beginning, to really acknowledge what's certain, what's changed, what's different. Then you move on to exploring and labeling your emotions. And when I say label your emotions, I do mean label them. So get a piece of paper and write down the way that you're feeling. And once you've got that list there, you want to try and identify your emotional hooks and patterns of response. So your emotional hooks are the particular feelings that you get at times of uncertainty or challenge, and they'll be different for all of us. And the patterns of response are the tried and tested ways we all know we respond when we're put under that kind of pressure. And you can overcome those emotional hooks and patterns by doing two things. The first thing is stepping back and referring to those key values that you've just written down in your section on your piece of paper. What are those values saying that I should do? And the next step is to really push those values, interrogate them for the answer to the particular conundrum that you're in. So if one of your key values, for example, was responsibility, what does that mean in this situation? How do I make that live and active? And the thing about this process is it gets you to step back from the instinctive reaction you may have to a situation and interrogate what you want to interrogate in order to respond in the way that you'd like to see yourself responding. So that's how you lead with those values more prominent. So back to you, Oscar.
So we've run through now, acknowledge the uncertainty, build trust and psychological safety, care for yourself and others, and demonstrate your core values. The fifth step we have today for you is to eliminate low priority tasks. So if we go back to the performance curve again, the first way we talked about taking where you are and moving it one step to the left was to actively care for yourself and your team using 5 ways to well-being. Another way you can reduce your stress is by eliminating lower priority tasks. This is going to be a practical session. So what I want you to do is to turn over your piece of paper and write the E section. What you do here is to write a list, just a complete brain dump of the things you have to do on your to-do list. That might include things that are specific to healthcare. Maybe it's specific patient jobs or follow-ups or paperwork or training. It might be other work, emails, specific meetings, coordination tasks. It might be life work, appointments, family events, jobs and chores. So I want you to just write a list without any judgment of the things you have to do on your to-do list. And I am going to give you 4 minutes for this because this is an important point. So 4 minutes to write down a list, a basic list of the things you have to do. And then we will work through prioritizing. One more minute on this, and then we'll look at prioritizing things. So just a list of things at the moment, things on your to-do list. Okay, so I'm aware that for a lot of us, this is not nearly enough time to write down the list of all the things we want to get done. But there will be time in your own time later to think about how this might apply in a more extended fashion. One of the most common tools that people talk about to arrange this is Eisenhower's Matrix, also known as the time management or prioritization matrix. And I'm mentioning this not because we're going to use it today, but because it is very common and some people do like it. So important on this means that it needs to be done by you and it's central to you or your team's achievement of your goals. Urgent means it needs to be done now. We're going to, there have been a range of different approaches to prioritization. There was a study done in 2017 which compared these tools and found that one of the quickest and most effective was the Moscow tool. So the Moscow tool was developed by DPhil around 1994 and came into software development. But it's easy enough to convert into day-to-day life and very easy to apply to a list like the one that we have in front of us. Moscow stands for must, should, could, and want. Must means high importance, it's time sensitive. This is a task that we must do, and we must do it within the time frame allocated. Should means it's also high importance, but maybe it's a little bit lower in terms of time sensitivity. Could is lower importance and lower time sensitivity. This is something we could do if we could find time for it, but it's not the most important of our tasks. Probably the most important of the items on this list, though, is the won't section. The won't is the group of things that when we are honest to ourselves, they can't reasonably be included. So what I want you to do is to take that list in front of you and to go down and say, as ruthlessly as you can, is this a must, a should, a could, or a won't? And put that letter beside it. We'll talk briefly in 3 minutes' time about what to do with those down the bottom of this in the won't. So I'll give you 2.5 minutes to decide which category each of these lies in. A couple of thoughts that you might want to think about when you're doing this is, how could I convert each task into a lower effort or higher impact task? One of the questions you can ask for that is, who else might have capacity for this task? Who else might enjoy doing this task? Who else might learn from doing this? Because that might build future capacity for this as well. The won't category is always a tough one. And it might be worth, for items in this, talking with the person who passed you the task about why you can't do this and other tasks like it in the future. You would normally explain that your main work and priorities don't include and don't give you time for these tasks, because a little time now explaining that nicely and clearly will save you a lot of time in the future. So we've run through 5 steps to leading and responding to uncertainty. Doing a self-audit, building trust and psychological safety, using the 5, including connect, ways to well-being, to care for yourself and others, acting from your values, demonstrating your values, not just responding to emotional hooks. We have a final couple of Mentimeter questions for you here. And the most important of those is the first question. This is a question for you more than for us. It's called the learning question, because it is, what will you take forward from this session? What was most useful for you in this session? So please do take the time to answer that question. Writing this down is a really strong way of helping you remember it for the future. If you've gotten stuck, please do pop through. You won't be able to skip all the questions, but you can put dots in them. So come through to this question and write it in here so that we know and so that you know what you're going to take forwards. You could also circle it on your piece of paper. So we've run through 5 tips today for how to lead and respond to uncertainty. And you've hopefully taken some thoughts that you will apply into your day today and heading forwards. It's been a pleasure running the session with you. And if you do have any particular questions, feel free to get in touch with us. And Oscar will give you our final exit slide. As we are moving to that, we will stick around in this session for a couple of minutes. We'll turn our video and audio off, but you can get us via chat if you wish. Please do remember to fill in the last couple of questions on the Mentimeter. It is important for your learning and for ours. Other than that, I hope you have a lovely day today. Thank you very much all.
Just a good play from me as well. Thank you everybody for your time. You can see on the final slide, that's more about us and what we do. If you're interested in this responding to uncertainty area, we have a recent bit on our blog, which the link is on the slide if you're interested in our contact details. But thank you very much for your time, and have a nice day.
One thing we forgot, this video will be uploaded onto the Thames Paediatric Wellbeing Hub on YouTube. So if you want to have a look back at anything, you can find it there.